Well, welcome everybody. My name's Peter Havens, and I have the honor of being the chair for Baldwin Management. And I myself am really looking forward to this family office Zoom call about continuing care communities. Before I make further introductions, let me turn it over to my associate, Christina McCloy, who will give us some rules of the road, if you will, so this Zoom call operates efficiently. Christina?
Hey everybody, I'm Christina. I am just gonna reshare real quick so we can just get through these and everybody knows what to expect. First things first is welcome. We're just gonna go over a couple of the rules of the road here. First, we just ask that unless you are actively presenting, we ask that you stay on mute so that we can just eliminate any kind of background noise that could interrupt from our viewers being able to hear the discussion clearly. We ask that you keep your camera on, turned off just for the duration. If and when you have a question during Q&A, we'll have you turn those back on and ask your question so that you're visible to everybody, and then we'll just turn them back off when you're done. Questions. If you have a question during the discussion, we ask that you stay muted, but use the raise your hand feature in the Zoom application. When you are selected, you'll unmute yourself, ask your question, and then just remute yourself afterwards. The way that you do that in the application, if you're using it here on screen, is there's a reactions button at the bottom of your screen. If you just hover over that, there'll be a button that says raise hand. And then when it's time to lower your hand, you'll do the same thing. You'll hover over that reactions button and lower hand will come up. If you're joining us by phone, you can dial *9 on your phone, and that'll put you in a queue that I'll see, and I will unmute you, ask you to ask your question, and then you can just dial *9 to lower your hand and take yourself out of the queue. And that is where we're at for the rules of the road. I'll go back over those briefly when we get right before the Q&A, and then we'll be good to go. So I'm going to pass it back over to Peter.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christina. So today we're going to discuss continuing care retirement communities. And we've enlisted an old friend of the firm, Bill Garrow, who is a CPA. He's operated a tax and financial consulting practice since 1999, assisting clients with their financial and long-term care planning needs. He's also worked as a healthcare administrator and a medical practice consultant since his graduation from Wharton in the 1970s. His interest in continuing care retirement communities originated when he helped his parents to secure care in such a community. And he's currently evaluating various continuing care retirement communities for his own and his clients' needs. He also has the unique distinction of having been an emergency medical technician in an independent care facility. So he's, if you will, well experienced in the space. And joining Bill is our own Richard May, who many of you probably know. He's going to help the discussion along. And I will now turn it on over to Richard and Bill.
Thank you, Peter. I have a privilege today of moderating, I guess would be the right word, the call and the conversation with Bill. Bill's not only been a good friend of RKM Baldwin and Baldwin Management for many years, but he and I have been personal friends for the better part of 30 years. We met at a personal financial planning study group back in Media, Pennsylvania, back in the mid-90s, and have worked together since. So I'm very pleased to have this conversation with Bill today. Just to give you a little sense of the layout of the call, after the introductions and the description of the call, there are four major sections of the call. The first part of it will be Bill recounting some of his experiences with continuing care retirement communities, namely, first of all, with his parents, secondly, with his clients, and finally, right now, as he's making the decision himself where he might end up as far as living in the future. And I think that's a great personal experience. We also have another client of ours, Mike Frumer, who has agreed to spend a couple of minutes telling about his personal experience that he's had over the course of the last couple of years in investigating, exploring, and then selecting a retirement care community for him to live in. And Mike's going to talk for a few minutes after Bill shares his personal experiences. Then Bill's going to talk in the next section about the CCRC and the levels of care that are involved in the operation of a retirement community, and then the types of contracts, which is very important. We could probably spend an hour on each of those two topics, and obviously we don't have an hour to do that today. So I think we're going to give kind of the brief overview, and then maybe a future call we'll drill down into some of the details. And the last two sections, Bill has developed a metaphor for choosing a CCRC, which most of us have probably done in our lives, is choosing what college to attend. The process isn't that different. And Bill's going to go into some of the similarities and maybe the differences. And finally, Bill has a list of 19, as he calls it, the wish list. I call it considerations that I think everybody should take into account when selecting a place to spend, most likely, the rest of their lives. And Bill's 19, I took the liberty of adding a 20th that I'll mention at the end of the call. So without further ado, Bill, you want to start off with your experiences with a CCRC in your past experience of life?
Certainly, and what a pleasure to be on this call with you, Richard, and you, Peter, and Christine moderating, and Zoom being our Zoom tech person. It's been a long journey, and it's still ongoing, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion today because I continue to learn more about continuing care retirement communities, and some days I feel like I'm getting confused on a more sophisticated level as I learn more and talk to more people. And it's a wonderful conversation starter. And so I will start the conversation with just my background. And I was the only child of older parents, and my father retired at age 65 from the Michigan Bell Phone Company the day I went to college. And so my parents were already retired when I was in college, and they had a fairly uneventful retirement for many decades. And during that time, I went on to work. I went to Syracuse University and worked at Upstate Medical Center, and started a career initially in medical education, and then switched to hospital and healthcare when I moved to Philadelphia to go to Wharton. My parents, despite my urgings, which I now understand as I think about moving out of my own home, were very comfortable in their own home. My father was the primary caretaker for my mother. Even though my father was older, my mother was not as healthy, and that continued for many years. And I continued to, in my hometown, there were 2 or 3 at that point in time continuing care retirement communities, and from time to time I would try to introduce that as a subject, and it just went nowhere. My parents, I remember them having problems deciding where they were going to move when they were married, so moving into a continuing care retirement community was equally difficult and daunting. So my father has throat cancer, can no longer take care of my mother, and through a series of events, they end up in a continuing care retirement skilled nursing unit that they probably would not have chosen. And I end up as the son flying back and forth to Michigan on a almost at least a quarterly basis, sometimes every 2 months, to try to manage their affairs along with managing by phone. And that went on until for 4 years, until my father died, at which my mother transferred herself with the event without telling me into another nursing facility. She was really inappropriately placed, and ultimately, through a series of events, I got her to move into an assisted living situation, which served her much better, and where she died on hospice care a year or two later. So with going through that, I have committed to try to do it better myself and start earlier in this process. And part of starting that process has been as a CPA with individual tax clients and helping them initially go through the decision of whether they got long-term care insurance, and in turn choose different facilities to consider and ultimately move in to. And I will reference some of those experiences. Richard and I have shared those clients, and he's familiar with some of their situations too and may want to comment. For myself, I'm trying to do it better. One of the things we'll get into here is that there are really two admissions processes to a continuing care retirement community. There's the admissions process to get on the priority list, and then there's ultimately the admissions process when a unit is offered and you select it. And so I've been on a priority list for a number of facilities and still trying to make up my mind. And the difficulty in doing that will be reflected in some of my comments, as well as the fact that there's not one criteria that one can use. Ultimately, however, my judgment is it comes down to a feeling that after doing my due diligence, that this is going to be the place for me. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Richard for a moment.
Well, it's interesting, Bill, because those are three vastly different perspectives. First, as the son of somebody who's looking for a life care facility. Secondly, for clients, so there's almost a fiduciary relationship. And then ultimately the personal decision, which is involved in doing it for yourself. And I can imagine the differences between the three. And this is a perfect opportunity, if you don't mind the interruption, Bill, to ask Mike and Bonnie Frumer, who've just gone through this process. I'm not calling you out of the audience. Mike's already agreed to recount some of his experiences. And you're unmuted, I think, Mike. Do you want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what the last 2 years have been like for you folks?
I will. I can't see myself on the screen here. Can you see me? Okay?
We can see you.
Okay,
we can
fine.
see you.
Okay, fine. Well, thanks for inviting me to talk at this initial episode of Real Old People. I'll give you some perspective on where we were. In 2013, we were living in 2 adjacent apartments, garden type apartments in Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia, which is a beautiful place, and the apartments were on an old, beautiful estate. And we loved where we were. This was 2013. We had been there for about 50 years, and we had no children. We were young, in our 70s, very active, swimming 3 or 4 days a week, walking a couple miles a day. Our apartments were on the 2nd floor of these garden apartments. The laundry facilities and our storage were in the basement. Parking was on the street. Had to dig ourselves out of the snow in the winter. So how did we conduct our search for CCRC? Well, in the early 2000s, both of our mothers were living in a CCRC, the same one, by the way, which if you would have had them described, you would have gotten totally different descriptions. And in 2013, we were in the right age and the right zip code and everything to get invitations to various retirement community options for free lunches and free music and very low-key speeches about, you know, what they were going to be able to do for us. Then Bonnie's attitude was, well, we're getting older, and where we are now may not be the right place forever, and we should seriously consider what we've heard. My attitude was a little bit different. Mine was more the Garrison Keeler Prairie Home Companion opinion. It said sometimes you have to look reality in the eye and deny it. So, but we continued to attend the musical events and free lunches. They were great. And during the sales presentations of some of these free lunches, one of the things that was stressed was the importance of that you could not wait until you couldn't manage your own living situation before you chose a new one. And the plan A for this, apparently among most people, was to expect their children, or in the ideal case, the oldest daughter, to bail you out once you got in trouble. Now, we had done poor planning in this regard because we didn't have any children. So when we started doing some research, and we figured we might need a plan B. And when the pandemic hit back in 1918, we continued doing our research on Zoom, because then the free lunches stopped, unfortunately. Now, one of the things we came across, an important thing in a lot of these presentations, was the Harvard Longevity Study. The Harvard Longevity Study was a study of about 724 male people, some of them students at Harvard, a bunch of them, and the others were some kids from really underprivileged areas. It was an interesting group they studied. They're still studying them after about 80 years, and they're studying some of the descendants of and the children of those two people. And the big thing that they found was that their main conclusion was the most important thing was socialization. You had to have friends, relatives, and people to socialize with, even if your diet wasn't that great and stuff like that, and your exercise wasn't that great. If you were socially connected, you were in good shape. You were in better shape than the other people. Our social connections were evaporating. A bunch of friends and relatives were shuffling off this mortal coil. So I wasn't completely convinced, but I went along with this planning process in the interest of domestic tranquility. After a lot of research and experiences, we knew people in places, we visited places, we made a choice. So in January 2022, we took our barrel of money, we gave it to these people at a CCRC, and started planning our move into there. We ended up actually not moving in for another year because of some life events that took place. But we did get there. So our situation now is we have a cottage in a CCRC. I'm sure Bill will tell you there's all kinds of living arrangements. We have a cottage in what we think of as a 55 plus community. It isn't, it's a CCRC. And you know, why 55 plus? Well, we have a cottage. We have a twin ranch house on a street. It looks like a 55 plus community. Why 55 plus? Because it really is attached to an older apartment style CCRC. So it has the options, should we need them at any time, which we shouldn't, because we're still quite vital and moving around. But it has those facilities that Bill will describe to you. And we've been here now for a little over a year and a half. So that should qualify us to be experts on living here, because they tell you it takes about a year before you really settle in. So what's good about it? Well, as the Harvard study said, you need socialization. So one of the things you need for that are people who are willing to socialize. And one of the things we found was that as people get here, they kind of lose their old identities, and they're now just retired people. So you may have been the chief medical officer of a major hospital. We have one. You may have been somebody who owned a chain of fashion stores. We have that. You might have been the CEO of a major corporation. We got one of them. But when you get here, you're just another retired person figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And that's good in terms of socialization. The other thing you need are things to socialize with and at. So we have all kinds of entertainments going on, more than we can handle in many cases, so we don't go to all of them. But there, we had things like 2 violinists from the Philadelphia Orchestra put on a concert. We've had some phenomenal jazz performers who we would gladly pay a lot of money to go see. We don't have to go see them, they come here. So there are all the kinds of things like this. Some of them are very good. Some of them go on our list of don't do that again. And but when people get to these things, they tend to socialize. That's good. There are all kinds of activities where we can socialize and become more fit. So swimming pools, pickleball, bocce, mangoes and bananas, all the things your heart desires, whatever. Besides socialization, what's been good, we actually upsized, because from our 2 apartments, which totaled about 1,600 square feet, we now have about 1,750 square feet in this nice little cottage. We even have a Wi-Fi connected oven. We have a garage. We never had one before. It's wonderful. And the location, we were conveniently located within about 50 feet of a Whole Foods, right near a Trader Joe's. Terrific location. And from what I've been reading, recently people are seeking out retirement places that are close to all kinds of amenities like that.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You're now stepping a little bit on Bill's toes, because his considerations are some of those very things that we have toward the end of the program. And if I could ask, maybe at the end, if there's still time, if you could continue on with your list. So, Bill,
let me make one more comment.
Sure. I'm sorry.
And that is that the bottom line of this is we're quite happy here, and we think we made a good choice, but we had to make compromises to do it in terms of location.
Thank you. And again, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want Bill to get through his agenda too. Bill, we were going to talk about the CCRC and the levels of care and the types of contracts also, although you're not going to address it in the depth that they probably deserve. And we have a slide, I think, to throw in here. Is that appropriate right now?
Certainly, Richard, and thank you very much, Michael and Bonnie. Your comments are very salient.
So does Christina have the slide?
Yes, I believe she's got a slide 1, which just is a quick definition of what a continuing care retirement community is. And I don't know whether I can proceed without that slide.
I guess we're going to have to.
Essentially, when you're talking about a continuing care retirement community, other terms that describe it are a life, you're moving to one location and you're going to age in place. You're essentially buying into a continuum of care, and different levels of care. And assuming that we aren't going to show that slide, Christina, I'll just briefly, comment that those levels of care are probably not unfamiliar with you, particularly if you've have parents that are in continuing care retirement communities or have friends. And then there's the independent living, which is what most people move into initially. And that's essentially you have just about everything that you had at home, but I'll use the metaphor. I'll get into the metaphor of going to college. There are some restrictions in terms of what you have and what you can do and when you can eat. And then there's the assisted living, which is a care, certainly more care than you would have gotten in independent living. And that in addition to some housekeeping that you would have been getting, you're getting help with perhaps dressing, getting to meals, what have you. And then there is the area of skilled nursing care, which is just a step down from a hospital. And then there are memory care units for individuals who have dementia or Alzheimer's, and they can either be unlocked or locked units. And there are two other areas which short-term rehab. One of the advantages of getting yourself on a priority list is if you need short-term rehab, you can go get a taste of your future continuing care community by staying in their short-term rehab facilities. And then some of the continuing care communities even have on-site hospice teams. So I believe we've pretty well covered item 4, Richard. And so I'm going to move on to start talking about how I love the metaphor of a continuing care retirement community is like going to college. And the metaphor certainly has its limitations, but the processes are somewhat similar in that there is the research phase. And unlike when I was looking for my parents, there certainly was not an abundance of information online. They had a limited number of friends and family who were in the nearby continuing care retirement communities, and they didn't get to the next step, which is once you decide which continuing care communities / colleges you want to go visit, you have a visitation process. And I don't know how many of you, I remember my parents taking me on hospital visitation, driving around the Midwest, and you may have had that experience yourself or with your children, or certainly heard about it with your grandchildren. So that's the visitation process is very important because as Mike commented on, you can get a free lunch, but more importantly, you get a chance to at least get an overview of a tour. And prior to COVID, a friend who was a social worker and I took advantage of the CCRC free lunch programs and went and visited a number of different facilities. And the takeaway from that is that make sure that you, and you might want to start there, you start with the medical facilities, because they'll say it again later on, is that in choosing a CCRC, you're also choosing a medical facility. So make sure you walk through the skilled nursing unit, and if perhaps not possible, the memory unit, but the assisted living, and just observe. If you get on the priority list, you can go back later and do a more in-depth process, but at least, you know, I've worked in healthcare long enough to know that in some facilities, there's even a smell test, so that at least you get a chance to be with a staff member who's taking you on the tour, and it's often important just to interview the staff person, and if you get a chance to talk to any of the staff, see how long they've worked in the facility, because longevity is certainly an advantage with most of the staff. If a facility is able to maintain their staff for many years, it means that they're doing something right in terms of staffing.
Bill, can I ask a question since you're at that point? How can the average, I mean, you have a medical background, and how would the average person assess the quality of the staff in a nursing home, short of talking to residents that are there?
Well, the advantage of getting yourself on the priority list is that you can go back and, as Mike commented, participate in some of those activities. And that gives you a chance to not only talk to residents that the CCRC might have selected for you to talk to, but also do your own random survey and get information from them, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, in terms of what their experience has been with their neighbors that have gone into nursing, the nursing or the assisted living. And certainly there's the advantage of going in as a couple. And I have friends that the husband or wife is still in independent living, and the other spouse has moved to another level of care, and they haven't had to give up their community, and they can see each other on a daily basis.
Thank you.
So you've gone on the visitation, and you've decided which ones you have an interest in perhaps pursuing. And at this point, there are really, unlike the college process where there's only one application, with the CCRC, there are two application processes. And most of the time, there's a time period of a number of years between the first one and the second one. And that the first one is to get on their priority list. And the way that that's done is they have a fairly short application along with submitting financial information, which they may use, or they may ask you for more information later on, and they definitely will, just to see whether you're a candidate financially, because as Mike referenced, CCRCs require, in a lot of instances, a bucket of money. And therefore, they want to make sure that that you've got money in order to at least start out for a good number of years. And there's some differences between for-profit and nonprofit, in that the nonprofits often have funds that if somebody outlives their assets, those funds will assist them in staying in the community. So the first thing to do is get yourself on at least one, if maybe not two or three, priority lists. And that has a whole list of perks with it. One, you can go stay overnight or stay 2 nights and really more seriously try out the food and the amenities. You also, if you choose one in your nearby location, now that we're out of COVID, you can more easily use their dining facilities, attend some lectures, perhaps use some of their different aspects of their fitness program, get monthly monthly newsletters and really do your due diligence here. And this process, I've heard that newly born parents with newly born children sometimes feel they got to get their kids on a nursing home listing, and this is a little bit like that. And that it may be 4 or 5 years or even longer than that before you're going to be quote unquote ready to go. And if you've been on the priority list for a long enough period of time, you'll be able to work with the facility and get a unit sooner rather than later. However, we're in a situation today which is just the opposite of what it was in 2008, which you may remember back in 2008. It was difficult for individuals to sell their homes, and CCRCs had plenty of places. And now we have exactly the opposite situation where with the baby boomers, sometimes it's a matter of a couple of years before the facility will offer you a place of your choosing. And I've talked to at least one real estate agent who has 12 pending sales. If only the people that he's got his clients can get their way into their continuing care community and also get into the unit of their choice. And there's also there's sort of a backdoor process that some people choose, okay, we're going to go into a unit that really we don't want, but we'll go get in the door. And once you're in the door, you're higher up on the list to get the type of unit that you really want. So as part of the priority list, the facility will ask you what sort of unit you want, maybe give you a choice of 2 or 3. And if you're really lucky, they will offer you one in this day and age sooner rather than later. And the people that were on the priority list during COVID, even though they thought they were way down on the priority list, these facilities, nobody wanted to move during COVID, so these facilities went through their priority list. And certain number of individuals I've talked to have, in fact, just made the decision we're going to move in, even though it's during COVID, and the facility won't be like it will be after COVID, fortunately. So there's the pre-admission or the priority list process, and then there's the admissions process of being offered a unit, at which case there's will be another update of your financial information. And at this point in time, they will be asking for information on medical and mental conditions. And the lesson I learned from my parents was, and I hear Mike and Bonnie talking about, is do it sooner rather than later, in that Richard and I have had experience with a client that we had our unit all picked out, and she was ready to go, and she failed the mental tests, and they were unwilling, given her dementia and onset of Alzheimer's, to, they were perfectly willing to offer her a higher priced unit in that part of the facility, but they would not offer her independent care unit. And that was certainly, she thought she could operate independently. They didn't. And it turned out that ultimately I was involved with getting her into another facility.
And I assume there's no appeal process to that, is there, Bill?
Well, they were willing to, repeat the test. And it turned out that back in her medical records, there was, she had done the test and done it better than she did at this time. So there really, wasn't the, wasn't the appeal process. It was pretty much fait accompli.
Wow. Wow.
So they often will offer you a place, and then the challenge becomes, hopefully, I'm trying to prepare for this, but until I choose a unit, it doesn't quite become real in terms of decluttering and getting stuff packed up and moved. The good news is that there are, unlike the fact when my parents moved, there are all sorts of people for a certain amount of money willing to help you move, and the facilities often have one or two recommendations who have moved other people successfully into the facility, and those people will go in, measure exactly the space that you're going into, work with you to decide, okay, what's going to go in those spaces, do sort of a dollhouse layout of what's going and where it's going. And if you want to, they will work on packing you up, finding you movers. And I've heard stories where they unpack you and you move in, and as if you had been living there for several months.
I would think that'd be a growth industry. Peter, we might want to look at companies that are in that space. Bill, what about finally the transfer process? If we're at 40 minutes, I want to make sure get to your list.
Just like going to college, in which I didn't like where I was. So after my freshman year, I transferred to another college. Fortunately, I got into that college just before my father was ready to plunk down another year of tuition, and I successfully made that transfer. The transfer we've actually had a client, Richard and I, who for whatever reasons was in a facility for almost a year and decided that they were going to move across the country from Connecticut to Colorado to be closer to a daughter. And the reason the year was important was that after a year, their entry fee would only be partially refunded to them, and the entry fee, it's important to know that you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in most instances, and that gets amortized over a course of 48 months or so, so that after 48 months, the facility has totally taken that money into their funding process and their reserve funds for taking care of your future care, as well as some of that money goes towards renovating the unit you're moving into, and in turn it's gone. So that's the importance of, it's important to know what your out is, but it's much more important. It's not much harder than transferring out of my freshman college into my sophomore college.
Bill, you had done a wish list that Mike addressed some of these issues when he was talking about their considerations that they took into account when they made their decision. And as Mike said, the compromise was location. Obviously, location's pretty important. The average Pennsylvania resident is not looking at 12 different state facilities. So what do you consider the principal considerations that should be on everybody's mind?
Well, I'll name three, of which there's several different aspects. One, you're choosing a community to live in a particular unit in terms of what size unit it is. So you're choosing a community that you're going to grow older with. And as Mike so well put it, is that now I'm a single person. Socialization, I realize, is even more important to me, and that's my main reason for moving at this point in time. The second thing that a lot of these wish lists relate to is I'm making a financial decision, so that it has to be a facility that I can afford, and the facility agrees that I can afford it. And there's quite a difference between a one-bedroom facility and a one-bedroom with a sunroom and perhaps a den, a second bedroom. So there's the financial consideration on my part, but there's also trying to evaluate the financial viability of the community itself. And that's problematical at best, but something, there is a lot of, they do have audits, they do have 990s, they do have a track record. And so there's the financial piece goes both ways. And then there's the healthcare piece, which you touched on, and which is again problematical. It's problematical both. I've got a client at one facility who's moved out of independent living, and I visited her in assisted living, and I'm impressed with the facilities and the care that she's getting. If I was to move to that facility, there's no guarantee that care and the people that are staffing that unit will be the same people 10 years from now. And in fact, they probably won't be. So all this being said, the people I talk to that have moved all wish they had done it sooner. And even the people that I'm not being introduced to by management. So with that being said, Richard, and recognizing the time limitation I have, I'm going to conclude and look forward to some questions.
That's great, Bill. And I had one just while people are lining up to ask questions. I guess Christina, you're monitoring that as well. There rankings that are available to people, and obviously rankings that depends on the criteria that are used. My alma mater always seems to be at the top of the U.S. News and World Report rankings, of which I'm very proud. But there are a myriad of considerations that would go into the evaluation of either a college or a life plan community. U.S. News and World Report, U.S. News and World Report has their college rankings. I know they have a CCRC rankings also. Newsweek, I was looking at Newsweek's rankings, and should we put any credence to rankings, or are we more interested in ratings?
Well, probably both, in the sense that it's one place to start. If I know that Newsweek group, I think, had 250 CCRCs in it. There are over 2,000 in the country. So the fact that your CCRC doesn't appear, just like in some cases, colleges don't give whoever's doing the ranking the information, and so the fact that your CCR doesn't appear on that list is not necessarily a something, but it's a place to start. Another, there's an independent accreditation process that CCRCs can submit themselves to, which is CARF International. And that, that may be an indicator. There's a Medicare 5-star evaluation of nursing homes. Again, I would hope that any place I chose would show up with 4 or 5 stars, not 1, 2, or 3. There's if you may very well want to involve in your decision your CPA or a healthcare attorney that's familiar with CCRCs, because there's an audit report and there's an IRS 990, which has some interesting reading, including what the salary is of the executive director and the CFO, and who's on the board and who's getting reimbursed, who the major independent contractors are that are getting business, with the facility. So hopefully that at least begins to answer your question, Richard.
Yeah, it does. It does. Do we have questions, Christina?
Not yet, but I just wanted to be able to remind people how to raise their hand.
Great.
So in the Zoom application, there's a react button. If you click that button, there will be an option to raise your hand for questions. If you're joining by phone, you can just hit *9, and that will also alert me that you have a question to ask. We also have the chat open. If you want to type in a question rather than asking out loud, just type it in the box. I'll read the question aloud and get your answer for you. All right, so the first person that we have is Ron Cantor. I'm going to have you turn your video on and unmute yourself. Go ahead.
I didn't hear any discussion about the nature of socialization, meaning the character of the people or the type of other residents. I know of one situation, somebody in our neighborhood who moved into a place and found out that they were sort of in political isolation and had to move to another place because they felt so uncomfortable. So I wonder if any of the speakers would like to comment on that or suggest how you would investigate that aspect of a particular CCRC.
Great question, Ron. I'll be glad to address it, in that that's the advantage of getting yourself on a priority list and going and hanging out at a continuing care retirement community. And clearly, if you're choosing based on where some of your friends have gone, they're going to be a very good source of that sort of information. There are some facilities that are associated with different denominations, and that may give you a level of information that you want to take advantage of. And then finally, there's the just going and spending time to see whether people have your shared interests, whether they're whether the things is as simple as whether where you're dealing with a high rise. Well, this doesn't address that so much as the fact that if you go talk to people, you're going to find that out. And then sounds like in that situation of the individual you're talking about, Ron, they didn't have that opportunity.
And it looks like Mike and Bonnie were nodding their heads like you agree wholeheartedly with some of Bill's observations.
Oh yeah, Bill did a great job on describing
Right.
a lot of the options. There are some other, he mentioned transferring things. I'm always very cautious about getting locked into stuff. So we actually took a 90% refundable contract.
Okay.
We could just choose to leave at any time and we'd only lose 10% of the barrel money that we gave them, which was still a reasonable chunk, but not on the upper ranges.
Just out of curiosity, Mike, you said that your compromise was location. Did you move away from family or friends to an area that was sort of
No,
unfamiliar with you?
We moved away from Chestnut Hill, which we consider probably the ideal urban place in the country. We're not that far away. We still run over there. It's only about 25 minutes away. But, you know, we're there during the pandemic. We could walk out of our door and take 12 different natural trails places. Here, it's somewhat more limited,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah,
still
it's-
a location where we are.
Am I right that you're in Jenkintown?
Jenkintown, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I will also add to that is it's definitely important to get a sense of the people who live in the community. Because you may compromise some of these other things that you really want because you just feel that you're not going to fit in with the social group that happens to be living in a particular facility.
Yeah, we visited one place and the big talk was they were going to double the size of the bar. And I don't think we need it.
That was not, and also it was a group of a lot of CEOs of companies, and we didn't fit into that kind of social structure. So I think that's an important thing to think about too.
Well said. Thank you.
Christina?
We don't have any questions.
I have one more, if I might, Bill. The Erickson Homes, which ran a series of retirement communities about 10 years ago, had serious financial problems. And I know there are a number of national associations that have homes in different states. How important or unimportant is this national organization to the operation of an individual home, or could you even comment on that?
I'd love to comment on that in that, you know, there certainly is the for-profit versus the nonprofit model. And the nonprofit model, particularly the religiously affiliated model, have funds in place to meet people's financial needs if they outlive their resources. You know, they may have to compromise in terms of the type of unit they have by moving to a smaller unit, but they are not going to be, you know, tossed out tossed out of the community, so to speak. Where, you know, I'm familiar with a situation where the individual and the family ran out of funds, and therefore they ended up in a Medicaid supported facility that with nowhere near the amenities that they had gotten used to. And there's also the concept that the farther away management is, the less they're going to really understand what's going on in the community. And if the more communities they have, the less they're going to be able to respond to individual communities' needs and wants.
May I ask a question, Richard or Bill?
Please go ahead, Roseanne.
Bill, did you think, or do you think that someone who's going to enroll in a continuum care should have a lawyer to look at the contract to get all the, you know, be sure that everybody's on the same page?
Certainly, we never really, as Richard and I discussed before this, talking about, you've seen one contract, and each one of these facilities will have contracts that, while similar, are certainly not the same, and those contracts are going to govern the rest of your life in some way, particularly if they speak to something that you want and they aren't going to let you have it.
What type of lawyer would that be?
Well, there's, unlike when my parents were doing it, there are now law firms and lawyers who specialize in matters relating to seniors.
Elder care?
Elder care, yep, yeah.
Okay.
Good question, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we can't close this without one other question for Bill. What are all those things behind you?
what they're called dinky toys, and they were made in England right after the war in the early 50s, and they are so solidly steel
Mm.
with moving parts, and
Mm.
I played with them as a child, and I saved. I would save up my holiday money and what money I earned from allowances and doing odd jobs, and go buy each one of them individually. And back then they were $10 or $15 a piece, and that was a small fortune. And they've gotten more airtime during COVID. And when people come and visit me, the first thing they do is walk to my office just to see them in 3 dimensions. So thanks for asking.
Well, thank you for, Roseanne, you're muted still. So, Peter, do you want to close the hour since it's 4:59?
Sorry, Richard, before we close, I had put a question in the chat. You both had mentioned a list of considerations, roughly 20 considerations. Will you share that with the group?
Yes.
Thank you.
There 19 of them are Bill's and 1 of them is mine.
Okay.
I'll be glad to send it out to the entire group of attendees today, right after the call.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for your comment, Phyllis. And it's as you can see, she's addressing one of the questions regarding community.
Angeline, you had a question.
Well, I just wanted to jump in to say that some folks on the call today did access our Zoom through the website versus accessing it through the registration page, which is totally fine. But if you accessed it through the Zoom, you might want to throw your email address in the chat so that the document can be sent to you.
Thank you very, very much. Peter, any closing comments?
Well, I think we might need to have another one of these meetings on this particular topic, because an area about which I'm very interested are the different economic models connected with these different CCRCs, at least as I understand it. It's not all cookie cutter. It's not one style. There are various, as you said, once you've read a contract, you've read a contract, and that's it. And I think there would be some interest in trying to understand the different models, Bill, and then which model you might think might be a better model for most people, not necessarily for everyone, but for most people. But thank you all very much for your attendance. Bill, terrific show. Thank you very much. Richard, as always, a wonderful job moderating. So without further ado, we will sign off. Thank everybody, and I think we really should have another one.
And thank you, Mike, for your participation.
Yes, it was invaluable.
Absolutely.
Invaluable.
You're welcome.
Great.
Great session. Very good.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
How many people did we have on the call? And